Hi, I'm Matt Baldwin, Regional Editor for Hagadone Media Montana. First off, a huge thank you for tuning into our podcast over the past year. Your support means the world to us, and it's inspired us to dive deeper into the world of podcasts. We've got some exciting updates to share with you. You might notice a fresh look and feel to our podcast lineup. We've revamped things a bit, breaking our shows into 4 distinct podcasts to make your listening experience even better. First up, Interlake News Now is simply News Now. Here you'll get Taylor's headlines, Melissa's local events, and all the timely news updates you need. Sports Now is now Keeping Score, where you can stay up to speed on local prep sports. Then there's Deep Dive. This podcast is all about exploring the stories of local people, businesses, and ideas. And if you missed last summer's Maritime Mystery series, don't worry, it's now the first season of Deep Dive. And of course, our monthly concert series, Press Play, now has its own podcast. Get ready for exclusive interviews with local musicians and all things Press Play. You can find links to all these new podcasts listed in the description of this episode, or simply search for Daily Interlake wherever you listen to podcasts. Once again, thank you for your incredible support. If you enjoy what you hear, be sure to like, subscribe, and leave us a review.
Each of us all across this great land has a stake in maintaining and improving environmental quality, clean air and clean water, the wise use of our land, the protection of wildlife and natural beauty, parks for all to enjoy. These are part of the birthright of every American. To guarantee that birthright, we must act, and act decisively.
The Endangered Species Act, signed by President Richard Nixon, turned 50 years old in December, marking half a century of federal management and protection of specific species that are experiencing unprecedented decline. Daily Interlake reporter Kate Heston is bringing you a 4-part series on the ESA, taking a comprehensive look at the species most at risk in northwest Montana, how the legal process outlined in the law has helped some bounce back from near extinction, and what it means when the lines between federal and state protections for animals becomes blurred. In our first story, we're going over the top species of concern in Montana. These are animals not listed in the ESA, but are species with little known information about them whose habitats are at risk.
The suckly cuckoo and bog lemming are among the 86 designated species of concern that can be found in Flathead County, along with the northern alligator lizard, black swift, mayfly, trumpeter swan, and the northern leopard frog. These listed animals are experiencing declining population trends, threatened habitats, or poor distribution. Kept by the Montana Natural Heritage Program, alongside Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, the Species of Concern list aims to provide a basis for proactive conservation to prevent a species from becoming threatened or worse, endangered. There is no need for a species to be listed under the Endangered Species Act if we work together beforehand and do it proactively. If we mitigate the impacts to the species on each and every project, there is no need for a species to be listed. According to Bryce Maxwell, program coordinator of the Montana Natural Heritage Program, the database is one way to ensure species do not become unnecessarily rarer. The Endangered Species Act, signed by President Richard Nixon, turned 50 years old in December, marking half a century of federal management and protection of specific species that are experiencing unprecedented declines. Preserving wildlife diversity for the sake of diversity is important, said David Tevs, who is seeking a doctorate in biology at the University of Montana. Tevs is a few months into a years-long research program focused on northern alligator lizards and western skinks, both of which are on the state's species of concern list. Tevs said there is a general lack of data on these reptiles.
So wildlife diversity for the sake of diversity. So just maintaining, our wild habitats and our species, keeping them safe, things like that. One of the biggest reasons I think from a practical value that is important is all that we can learn from wildlife and all that it's done for advancement of humankind, things like that. I think there isn't too much work I'm aware of on northern alligator lizards and western skinks and how that has impacted, human development. I think another area, again, because I like my creepy crawlies, I like my lizards, my snakes, things like that. If we're getting rid of a lot of these species without properly studying them, or if they go extinct, there's a lot of missed research opportunities and ways that we could help human society. So for example, snake venom, there's been enormous amount of medical breakthroughs come from snake venom or lizard venoms. For example, things like Gila monsters are one of the only venomous lizards in the world. And there have been a lot of, I think it's diabetes medication. I could be wrong on the specific medication. I know there's been a lot of medications that have come from reptile venom and us studying the chemical properties of that venom and how it interacts with the body as well.
Interesting. Yeah. So there's lots to maybe be figured out that we don't know
Yeah.
right now.
And if we're, species are dying, or for example, if species are going extinct that we've never even discovered before, we could be missing out on these really beneficial opportunities.
Why, from a conservation aspect, should we care about preventing these federally listed species, or I guess state species, from being endangered or extinct?
Yeah, so there's, I think, one of the biggest reasons that we should be preserving these species is kind of the snowball effect of there's a lot of species that interact with one another, species that are dependent on another species to exist in the wild. Again, pulling from other areas that I've worked in, I spent a lot of time doing tortoise conservation in Florida. And so these tortoises, big burrows, and so a lot of animals in the Southeast use these tortoise burrows as a home for like an overwintering ground or to get away from the heat of the summer. I think the last count was there is over 300 species that use these tortoise burrows. And so the species in particular is a gopher tortoise. And I'm pretty sure it is not listed on the ESA. I know there's work to put it on the ESA, but it's been kind of a difficult issue.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Obviously, if there's so many animals that are dependent on the burrows, or how one species manipulates the environment to help another one, maybe whether it's directly or indirectly, a snowball effect could have large consequences that we can't even predict at this point.
Yeah, no, it's a super great point, is that everything's connected at the end of the day. And so if you take one factor out, you might be impacting something in a much larger way than you might have anticipated, first and foremost.
Exactly.
The northern alligator lizard gets its name from its bone-reinforced scales on its back, like the common alligator, although their tiny teeth don't resemble their namesake. Its range overlaps with western skinks, and both are found in Flathead, Sanders, Lincoln, and Lake counties. The alligator lizard has been found in 8 counties west of the Continental Divide, including a specimen from Wild Horse Island in Flathead Lake. There's not a lot of lizards this far north, so having 2 in the same area is a really good way to study what sort of adaptation is needed to live this far north, Tevs said. The lizards like to stay in cooler areas, specifically with streams and riparian forests. It's common for them to be under down logs and rocks or a pile of leaves and needles, but they normally stick close to water. Tevs' study focuses on that phenomenon. One concern about the species is that as water sources change and habitat degradation takes place, the already uncommon lizard could decline at a concerning rate. Continued human expansion and growth could also encroach on their habitat. High-latitude, cold-adapted lizards are pretty rare, Tevs said, making these species worth preserving. There are only a handful of lizard species in Montana, and 2 of them are right here. If we were to lose those 2, that would be a blow for Montana, he said. Losing a species affects the ecosystem as a whole, Tevs said, which is why studying and monitoring them from lizards to mammals to birds is important. The Montana legislature established the Heritage Program in 1985, partly in response to some of the information needs associated with the Endangered Species Act. The data was not meant to be regulatory, said Maxwell with the Heritage Program. Having these databases is a way of providing information to resource managers. It's kind of a look before you leap. Also on the list is the black swift, a dark, small bird with unique needs, according to Dan Casey, an ornithologist and longtime member of Flathead Audubon. One of the many avians on Montana's species of concern list, they live behind waterfalls or on wet cliff areas in high elevations, only giving birth to 1 young a year. Some birds have very unique lifestyles, Casey said. Reduced water flow, decreased snowpack, and increased recreational use in areas where the birds nest are reasons for concern, according to the Montana Field Guide. Montana Partners in Flight, part of a national group focused on land bird preservation, put together a monitoring program for the birds in the early 2000s. They started monitoring waterfalls that could have nests, finding more and more spots where they were living. Some nests were discovered in Haystack Creek and McDonald Creek in Glacier National Park. Throughout the program, which Casey is a part of, scientists have found more swifts and discovered that the Glacier Waterton ecosystem is incredibly important for the birds. Because they're relying on waterfalls and higher elevation, there's a real concern with climate change and water cycles changing, he said. The flammulated owl is another bird on the species of concern list, specifically found in the Flathead and Lolo National Forests. The owl requires older stands of ponderosa pine and Douglas fir trees, often found in snags and woodpecker cavities. Casey said much of their habitat has been lost due to forest management. The fact of the matter is that part of a healthy forest is having dead and dying trees, especially for those birds that need cavities. The decline of common birds is telling us that things are awry. Right now, because of climate change especially, there are disruptions. The birds are two of just thousands of animals that the Montana National Heritage Program monitors. According to Maxwell, from subdivisions to parking lots to timber sales, it's important to constantly ask what humanity can do to mitigate human-imposed impacts. Tracking the status of species of concern can help inform better decisions moving forward.
The big thing that's worth hammering home is that people should obviously don't expect the general public to go out and memorize the Montana species of concern list. I think last time we spoke, I gave kind of an unofficial plug for the iNaturalist app, for example. And so just if you see something that you might be that you think might be a rare species or seems new or novel to you, you should report that. I think having the general public out there helping us be aware of, where these animals are, what they're doing is super, super important.
Every species is important because every species fits into the whole ecosystem. Everything is tied to something else, Maxwell said. We need to address some things if we want to keep ecosystems operating.
To read Kate's stories in full, visit dailyinterlake.com.